Well, hello there, and thank you very much for clicking on this video today. So today, we're back to the never-ending issue of Israel and Palestine. But this is a particularly grave issue around about how basically the UK government is essentially covering up details and documents about an Israeli spy firm and their interference in the Scottish elections. This is an organisation which has been accused of interfering in the elections of other countries as well, and has been investigated by many media outlets and also the French intelligence agency, or a French intelligence agency rather, and it's been found to have been doing this, and the British government completely refuses to publish the information that it holds. So this story is coming from, it's been reported by quite a few people, Independent, The Guardian, but this is specifically coming from the Canary, and I said quite a few organisations have kind of talked about this. So, as I've said, the UK is refusing to publish any information it holds on what is a very shadowy Israeli firm caught meddling in Scottish parliamentary elections. Now, the government cites a dubious freedom of information request exemption, which allows documents to be withheld if they would supposedly prejudice relationships between the UK and any other state. So, what the government is essentially saying is that the UK's security apparatus values its relationship with an apartheid state, a state that is committing an active genocide in Palestine, over its own Scottish citizens, essentially. So that's all that you need to know about how Westminster works, and how Prime Minister Andy Burnham's government has refused to publish files linked to a Zionist spy firm called BlackCore. Now, BlackCore has been found to have interfered in Scottish, French, New York City, and Angola and Togo's elections. So, to go into that information with a little bit more detail, we're going to now jump to a previous article done by the Canary, which actually kind of explains a little bit more about this. So, as it says in the other article, the Canary previously reported on a joint French/Israeli media investigation into the shadowy outfit BlackCore, as it is accused of setting up, amongst other things, a bogus Palestine charity, and is also accused of interfering in elections. So, the French Domestic Security Agency is investigating this, and the Israeli newspaper Haaretz and a French outlet called Liberation also investigating it, and Liberation reported on the 11th of June this year that the Israeli firm BlackCore, suspected of interfering in France's local elections in March, is also suspected of meddling in elections in New York City and Scotland, and operating in Angola and Togo. The head of France's disinformation detection service, Virginia, said on Thursday. Our second article covered another aspect of BlackCore operations, also published on the 11th of June. It said, a network of fake fitness coaches, Vietnamese bots, Facebook ads aimed at Brits, and a bogus humanitarian fund for Gaza, a Haaretz and Liberation investigation exposes a digital operation whose infrastructure leads back to BlackCore, the Israeli influence firm under investigation in France. So various Israeli influence operations have come to light, over the years. And this one looked at how the Israeli military shapes media reporting on the Gaza genocide. Another examined leaked documents about a military-run course for English and Hebrew-speaking influencers. The fact that Israel runs a complex web of influences is well known. It's not new news in that sense, but actually getting a lot of mainstream attention on it is not that common. So even though that's Russia and China, who are often charged with interfering in the West, and Russia certainly, there's been accusations, there's a decent amount of evidence to indicate that they partially or through surrogates approve of funding certain far-right groups in Europe, groups that are very keen on disbanding the EU or reconciling with Russia. But when it comes to Israel, they just seem to have a carte blanche to basically interfere with elections, and many of these governments are just not interested in even reporting about it. So, going back to the report, the new Haaretz report sheds light on how Israel runs its own operation. So it said, the report analysed BlackCore's digital footprint and uncovered a toolkit of influence operation systems routed through servers in Britain, Germany, Finland and Lithuania. Closest to home is the allegation that Israel tried to shape Scottish elections, the French security agency Virginia claims. France's cybersecurity agency has accused the Israeli tech company BlackCore of interfering in Scottish elections earlier this year by targeting the First Minister, John Swinney. The disinformation detection agency Vigidian said BlackCore had this year used proxy social media accounts to target Swinney, the National Scottish Party, and the Scottish Government on 4 occasions. Vigidian's head of digital interference, Sebastian Lacunu, I think it's pronounced, said, this modus operandi was not limited to municipal elections in France. It also appears to have been used to carry out foreign aid digital interference operations in other countries or other regions, such as Angola and Togo, the elections in Scotland, and the 2025 municipal elections in New York. So it has been reported that BlackCore targeted left-wing candidates in places like Marseille and Toulouse in their elections. And this next part of the Israeli news agency service at Haaretz, its report verges on the very weird. It centers on an allegedly fake charity named Sadak Palestine, I believe that's pronounced, which presented itself as non-governmental, non-political, non-profit helping Palestinian families, children and refugees affected by displacement, poverty and war. The charity had a website with a credit card donation form and maintained a social media accounts on X, Instagram and Facebook, and even had a paid advertising budget on Meta platforms. However, it did not have any verifiable existence. No organisation by the name appears in the UK charity register, nor in the similar US, EU or Israeli records offline. Its social media following, our analysis found, was largely manufactured, including fake accounts. The charity's digital footbacks lead back to BlackCore, which has been described as an Israeli elite influence cyber technology firm. And other researchers described the website, this fake charity website, as a honeypot decoy to built to attract people who want to help, in this case by aiding Palestinians, and take the donators' money, their personal data, or both. And so what you can kind of take from that is that they're basically using this to gather information about how many people actually want to send aid to Gaza, how many people are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause in general. As they say, a honeypot. So the page pitched the fund against the backdrop of the collapse of the official humanitarian aid in Gaza, noting that USAID and UNRWA, I think it's pronounced, halted most of their operations. Ordinary donors had to step in, and it declared its location as Palestine. Actors' own metadata places it in the United Kingdom. In its 13 years of existence, the account has never once liked anything. So this is an account which says that it's in Palestine. It's not. It's in the UK, which kind of goes back to kind of this whole thing of the UK government covering for Israeli intelligence, essentially. And the account has never liked anything, which is incredibly suspicious. The followers were also faked. A mix of UK-based fitness accounts and Vietnamese bots. Researchers traced the page back to BlackCore via digital certificates, the public immutable record created every time a website obtains an encryption authorization. So that's kind of the details of what investigations into this particular Israeli influencer company does. Now, one reason why they might target Scotland, its Scottish government has been more outspoken, more critical of Israel, both in the present and the past. So that does not exactly surprise me. So one thing that is interesting is that a freedom of information request submitted to the Scottish government regarding BlackCore sought some information withheld on the grounds of national security, according to the national paper in Scotland. However, other files that were released suggest the SNP administration only learned about the Israeli spy company actions via social media reporting. So, from what we do know, it seems the Scottish government was kept completely in the dark about this. They didn't know about this. The British government was basically withholding that information from them. I imagine they were not thrilled to find out via social media that, they were being spied on and that there was interference in local elections in Scotland. So after BlackCore was publicly named, the article in the Canary says, its online presence was quickly completely wiped. The identity of those behind it has not been established or even publicised, whether that's because journalists fear reprisals from Israel or whether they just weren't able to get any kind of information on it, who knows. As the Canary notes, considering the fact that Israel is responsible for over 60% of murdered journalists last year, most who were reporting from Gaza on the Zionist genocide, it's probably not surprising that a lot of media outlets were probably not overly interested in looking into this. So originally Sweeney said the French government report needed to be taken seriously. The SNP said any interference in our democratic process would be thoroughly investigated. However, the UK government continuously and flatly refuses to address the situation publicly. And so we're going to go into what the actual national newspaper in Scotland did, or tried to do, to gain access to this information. So, two identical freedom of information requests were submitted by the national newspaper to both UK and Scottish governments. The diligent paper bid for release of any correspondence, including emails and letters, mentioning the French government agency Virginia, and discussing its findings regarding alleged Israeli-linked influence operations and the firm BlackCore affecting Scotland or Scottish elections. The UK government responded first in the fashion of all journalists will be familiar with. This was to say, it delayed their response time beyond the standard 20-day deadline. The delay confirmation also read that we have established that your request engages Section 24 of the Freedom of Information Act, which relates to information that must not be disclosed in order to safeguard national security. So yet again, national security basically been used to cover up what's going on, as it very often is. Nothing says like there's a cover-up by a government saying, no, it's national security, we can't talk about it. So the UK government's Cabinet Office then responded again to say that it would not be publishing any of the information requested in the order to avoid giving offence to other nations and retain the trust of our international partners. We have weighed the public interest against a very strong public interest in safeguarding national security. It's important that sensitive information is protected, as disclosure of information would damage national security. This is the interest that could only be overwritten in exceptional circumstances. Taking into account all circumstances in this case, we have determined that the balance of public interest favours withholding this information. So as I've said, the SNP-run Scottish government also withheld some aspects of the information on national security grounds. However, it did publish other documents, which mostly concern officials trying to coordinate a response to the French government's agency report. So amongst those files that were released included official drafts of statements to be released to the media. Another included what was the SNP's Minister of Europe, Stephen Gethins, I believe that's pronounced, asking for a letter to be drafted, saying, from him to the Defence Secretary, the Israeli tech firm accused of targeting FM, the First Minister. What is perhaps most shocking is that the files released by Scotland's government suggest they did not even know about this Israeli sabotage before the media reports, as I've already said. And one email between two redacted figures states, you might not have seen this, both redacted, and I've only had sight of this morning, but given a link to recent Scottish elections, I thought it best you were cited. Copied in the email was John Webster, the Principal Private Secretary of the First Minister John Sweeney, who responded, I have shared this with FM, anticipating that he will want to understand more about this report, what we, UKG, and security apparatus knew about it, and what actions, remedial and future, proactive are to be taken. Another document included the Scottish Government's release states, this is an update on action taken in response to the report by Virginia, the French Disinformation Detection Service. However, the actual update itself is redacted on national security grounds. The redactions are understandable, but it's not really clear whose interest it is, apart from, obviously, the Zionist actors are served by withholding so much information. And to kind of chime in on this, Scottish Greens co-leader Gillian McKay, as a member of the Scottish Parliament, told the national newspaper, his allegations of meddling in elections from BlackCore represent a potential extremely serious threat on Scotland's democracy. It is also deeply concerning to see reports that the Scottish Government appears to have learned about this through the press, while the UK Government is refusing to disclose what it knew on the grounds of national security and international relations. The public deserves to know whether warnings were missed before polling day and what action has been taken since. All governments should do their part to provide clear assurances that Scotland's democratic process are being protected. As that kind of concludes this particular article, but it is well known that most governments use X as a battleground for disinformation and manipulation, and also just shouting outright propaganda. It is very easy for intelligence agencies to basically create anonymous, numerous bots, flood it with information, and then disappear. Although in the case of this BlackCore, they only disappeared after they'd been outed. And from what the article was saying, they'd been active on that platform for well over a decade. So they were on there for quite a long time. But what is deeply disturbing about this is it kind of reveals how far the British government will go to protect Israel, to the point where they're happy, very willing, for Israel to basically interfere in Scottish elections and interfere with the democratic process. They're happy with that. It's like, okay, if you want to do that, we will do and say nothing. We are your obedient dogs, and that is what we will do. We will protect you no matter what the hell you do. And it's completely it doesn't shock me that the British government would put Israeli interests over the interests of their own citizens, but it is actually quite something to actually see it spelled out, in black and white, actually on paper. It is quite something else. But anyway, what do you think about this particular news story? I very much appreciate you listening to this little rant today, as I always try to do. And I will catch you in the next video. So you know what? You have a good day wherever you are in the world. So, bye-bye.